Well, I'm almost 44 years old, and I'm realizing in life that I want to have sort of a sense of doing good work. I don't know if it's because I'm getting older and I want to know that what I do matters. But I came across a poem this week that I think you'll all like. It has helped me make decisions about the work that I do and get more focused and more attentive on my outcomes. So it's a poem by William Wordsworth, the English Romantic poet. I'm going to share it with you today along with my interpretation. Let's get into it. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Read Well podcast. My name is Eddie Hood and I am so excited that you're here. This is going to be a unique episode. I haven't done this before, but you might notice if you're watching the YouTube version of this show that there's a big microphone in my face now. So I'm deciding to kind of merge my content. Really, in the past, I have been sort of run rampant because I am creating a podcast episode, which is separate from a YouTube episode. And then I've got my newsletter and so on. And it's forced me to almost water down some of these pieces that I really want to do well. And it's because of this poem that I'm going to read to you today that I've decided I want to do more work that matters. And so you'll see each week from me coming out one piece of content that I put my heart into, something I think is really worth your time. Hopefully it has made an impact on my life. In this week's case is this poem by William Wordsworth. Now the poem, it's actually kind of hard to pronounce. It's called Nuns Fret Not at Their Convent's Narrow Room. So if you know anything about Wordsworth, he was a poet he lived 1770 to 1850. And he was one of what we would call the Lake poets in England. He is known for the Romanticism movement, one of the sort of founding fathers. And what we love about him is that he specialized in doing this work. So you may or may not be into poetry, but his message is it's just on target, right? Because I feel like today we are all spread very thin. At least I can speak to myself feeling that way. And as I show up and kind of dabble in lots of interests and things, I feel like I'm kind of getting good at a lot of stuff, but I really crave knowing what it feels like to be great at something specific. And so this poem is going to help us do that. Now, before we get into actually reading the poem and what it is and why it's special, I want to thank each and every one of you for going to the podcast this past week and sharing your testimonials and leaving me a review. Okay, let's get into this poem by Mr. William Wordsworth. Now, this is a specific kind of poet, right? We're talking about a sonnet here. Now, a sonnet is interesting because it really forces the poet into a specific set of rules. And William Shakespeare was quite famous for writing sonnets. Wordsworth liked to write in sonnets and so on. But here's what I love about this. It's just 14 lines of poem. That's actually one of the first rules of a sonnet. It should be 14 lines. Now, each of those lines should have approximately 10 syllables to them, which really makes the poet's job even harder. If you've ever tried to write a poem, you know that it's enough of a challenge just to get the words to rhyme and to mean something coherent. But now you're confined to a certain level of syllables per word, which really wants to trip the writer up. The third rule with a sonnet that we're going to be reading today is that it should focus on the theme of love, which makes sense, right? Because William Wordsworth is a romantic poet. Now, you'll find in this poem, he doesn't actually talk about love, at least not in the traditional sense, but it will help you, again, connect with the work that you do. And the fourth sort of constraint that you'll find in sonnets, which isn't always the case, but there's usually something called a volta. And a volta is Italian for turning, which means that at some point in the poem, there needs to be a turning, sort of a sense that something has changed and that there's a new beginning, which makes sense with love, right? A new sort of look on life. Well, this usually happens in a sonnet around line 8 or 9. So the first 7 sentences often are building something up. They're sort of creating a scene, and then there's a change, and then we get to see what happens after that change. So, all right, without further ado, let's read William Wordsworth's poem titled Nuns Fret Not at Their Convent's Narrow Room. Here we go. Nuns fret not at their convent's narrow room, and hermits are contented with their cells. And students with their pensive citadels, maids at the wheel the weaver at his loom, sit blithe and happy, bees that soar for bloom. High as the highest peak of furnace fells will murmur by the hour in foxglove bells. In truth, the prison into which we doom ourselves no prison is, and hence for me in sundry moods 'twas pastime to be bound within the sonnet's scanty plot of ground. Pleased if some souls, for such their needs must be, who have felt the weight of too much liberty, should find brief solace there, as I have found. Okay, that's Wordsworth's poem titled Nuns Fret Not at Their Convent's Narrow Room. Now let's break this down and we'll talk about how it might help you in your own personal life get some focus and make some decisions that are going to matter. I started off this episode relating the fact that I'm almost 44 years old, and that feels like a turning point in my life. I mean, we're often known as human beings for having this wonderful thing called a midlife crisis. I don't know if I've had one per se. Maybe I have. I don't know. But what I do know is that when I turned about 35 or 40, I thought, wow, okay, like we're kind of hitting a pinnacle here. I really want my life to stand for something. And I just felt like it wasn't. I mean, I was doing well. I have beautiful kids and an amazing wife, and we're happy and we work hard. But one wants to leave some sense of a legacy. And while I understand the argument that our kids are our greatest legacy, and I would agree with that, I would also say that, at least for me, I want to leave something behind that sends some sort of message to future generations, something that matters. Maybe it's just my stamp to say I was here. I don't know. But this poem, when I read it, really got to me. So we're going to break this down line by line. Now, the first, I believe, 7 lines are leading up to, they're setting the foundation, as I mentioned, with a sonnet. So line number 1, nuns fret not at their convent's narrow room. So he is specifically pointing out a specific kind of person here, the nun. And he's saying, hey, these ladies live in very small rooms with lots of restrictions about how they can dress and act and how they can spend their free time. And most of us might look at that and go, no thanks, that is not for me. But you know what? The nun, in this poem at least, is not fretting about that. In fact, she embraces it. She's there by choice. She's there for a reason. And she finds meaning and solace in that way of life. Now, the second line builds on this by pointing out a second kind of person. Now, the second line of the poem says, and hermits are contented with their cells. So here, again, he's pointing out a specific kind of person, that a hermit, somebody who wants to be away from society, is in fact happy in doing that they put themselves into a cell. They're happy being alone. They're happy not connecting with other people. And some of us are like that. Many of us might think, ooh, that sounds awful. I want to be with my friends and my loved ones. But for a hermit, that's the way life should be. The third line builds even more by saying, and students with their citadels. So here, a student really, if it's a true student, not somebody that's in college because they have to be, right? But somebody who's there because they genuinely want to learn. That authentic student is more than satisfied by sitting in the library all day, reading complex books. I mean, we're talking about my ideal lifestyle, right? It's just sit down with great books and learn. I could spend every day doing that. And that is, in fact, what I'm trying to do with my life, which is why I've gone back to college, if you didn't know that. Okay, building even more, line 4 says, maids at the will, the weaver at his loom. Picking 2 new kinds of people here who are set to a specific sort of skill, right? We're weaving things, we're looming things. And you might think that like that would get boring over time. And you know what? For many people it does. I get that side of the argument. But if you are truly a weaver and you sort of put your craftsmanship into that, you can find real joy in making the best handcrafted rug or whatever it is that loomers loom, right? That would bring real honor and respect and a sense of legacy. And in fact, I would argue that you could probably find that sense in any kind of work you do as long as you decide to dedicate yourself to it, which is what this poem's about. Okay, now, so he points out that the next line here, sit blithe and happy. These people are in their lives and they're happy. He then says, bees that soar for bloom. He even now goes to an insect and says, even the bugs get it, you guys. The bugs are dedicated to a specific purpose, and they are out there, and they are happy, and they're fulfilling their role in life. In the case of the bee, it is to help nature bloom. High as the highest peak of Furnace Fells. Okay, now we're going from bees to mountains. Even the mountains have a specific purpose. They've chosen their path. They're going to be mountainous, right? They're going to fulfill that, and they're going to be grand and beautiful and inspirational. Now, this section here says, we'll murmur by hour in foxglove bells. I think this is the trickiest line of the poem, and quite honestly, I need to spend more time really understanding this. I think foxgloves are a plant or a flower or something. I should have looked that up before I decided to do a video or a show on this poem. But here is the volta, right? Remember, volta stands for turning point in Italian. This is where our sonnet is going to shift. Because up to this point, you've been hearing about people in their chosen professions, even insects and mountains in their chosen way of life. And if you're anybody that lives in the current sort of contemporary society, you might feel like, ugh, that makes me feel gross. Having to choose and sort of dedicate myself to something feels like a prison. I would rather keep my options open. I would rather try new things and explore as many things as possible. And while that is good, yes, while that is good, I've been doing that for now almost 44 years, and it is really hard to feel like you're making traction in one specific thing. And traction, when you go from that sort of breadth lifestyle to a depth lifestyle, and you really decide to dig in on something and become great at it, there is a whole new sense of fulfillment there that you cannot get by keeping your options open and trying lots and lots of things all of the time. So, different kinds of happiness. I guess my argument here is that if you feel like you're just a little unfulfilled, maybe you are, maybe this poem is for you like it was for me. So, let's read the volta. Let's see, this is line number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It's right where it should be. According to the rules of a sonnet, line 8 or 9 should be the volta. Let's read it. In truth, the prison into which we doom, line 8. Line 9 says, ourselves no prison is, and hence for me. Okay, so he just shifted there. Hey, dear reader, these things that you think are prisons, these commitments, whatever it might be that you're committed to, I know you think that's a prison, but it's not. It is not a prison. And let me explain why. So now he's going to take the rest of his poem and explain why choosing to be great at something is not a prison, but will set you free. He says, in sundry moods 'twas pastime to be bound. So in other words, it's like pastime. It's enjoyable time to be bound by something, to have a work to go to have a purpose that calls to you. That is a good thing. Now, this is the part where he applies it to himself because, and I love this part of the poem because Wordsworth could have written, essays and literature and nonfiction and all sorts of random kinds of poetry, but he committed to romantic poetry. Not just poetry, he got even more refined and said, I'm going to be a romantic poet. And even more than that, you guys and gals, he said, I'm going to be really good at sonnets. Now, he wrote other things than sonnets, but listen to this line. He said, within the sonnet's scanty plot of ground. So this is his choice as a creator. He's going to choose to be a romantic poet who is really great at sonnets. And as you've learned today, a sonnet is a pretty constrained thing, right? 14 lines of poetry, each line with 10 syllables each, a theme of love, and there's a volta or a turning point, right? We might think, oh, I don't want to do that. My work's going to feel repetitive over time, and people are going to think that I'm sort of predictable. Wordsworth knew that that was not the case, that by choosing and narrowing himself down, he could become one of the greats, which is why now, 174 years after his death, we're still talking about him. Wordsworth is quoted all the time in books and movies. He's still considered one of the greatest poets of all time. And I think that's because of the decision he made in this poem to specialize in something and get good. All right, so he goes on to say, last line said, within the sonnet's scanty plot of ground, pleased if some souls, for which such their needs must be, who have felt the weight of too much liberty. Okay, so let's hit pause there and consider this. He's saying, hey, all of you readers out there, if you've ever felt like you've got too much freedom, too much liberty, and let me sort of translate that for you in modern language. Hey, dear podcast listener or YouTube video watcher, if you feel like you're completely distracted by life, by the internet, and by all of the emails and by all of the people needing your time and attention, then maybe, just maybe, you have a decision to make. He says that you should find brief solace there, as I have found. So there's his challenge to you. Look, you feel distracted, you feel worried, you feel anxious, you feel like nothing you do matters. Make a decision. Decide what work you're going to do, and then get really good at it, right? Stop playing in all of the puddles and ponds and pick one and learn how to swim there really well. Now, so what does this mean for me? That is why I've brought these two pieces together. I'm looking at a camera for my YouTube channel right now, and I've got a podcast mic next to my face. And the reason why is because these are not necessarily my chosen means of expression. I want to be an essayist. I want to be a writer, which is going to lead us into this week's book recommendation, by the way. For me, I want to be an essayist. I want to be one day a really good writer. And in fact, I want to write something that matters, whether that's a collection of essays or a book. I'm not quite sure yet, but I do know this. I want to get really good at making arguments on paper that walk a reader through a clear and critical thinking process. I think that's the hardest thing to do, but I love the challenge, which is why I went back to college this semester. I'm getting a degree in philosophy and a minor in English, just so that I can work on this skill. As I read this poem, I thought to myself, I really have to make some changes in my life if I'm going to get good at writing. For example, I have I have a lot of interests. My life has been sort of this diving deep experience into everything from photography to close-up magic to playing the guitar, of course, reading books and travel and all of this stuff. Now, while all of those are interesting and they get me excited and I want to learn, I've realized I have to say no to a lot of those, or at least turn them way down so that I can turn one of the channels up. And for me, that is the channel of writing. And so I would ask you what you're going to do, what your decision is going to be, and what you can accomplish by focusing on something specific. Okay, with that in mind, let's jump into this week's book recommendation. I'm going to cheat a little. It's actually not a book, it's an essay, but it's sold as a book because it's a longer essay. It comes in at 93 pages. You can get it on Amazon, which is probably the easiest thing to do. But it is a book by Mr. Christopher Hitchens titled Mortality. So here's Mortality. It's just a little black book. Now, this is funny because when I talk about Christopher Hitchens, you're going to, if you've heard of his name or heard him speak, you're going to have a visceral reaction in your gut because he is someone that was very polarizing. He was a polemic writer. He went out as sort of this iconoclast and challenged very cherished ideas. He had no fear at sort of calling things out. So he spoke about religion and politics and morality and sex and all of the stuff because he wanted us to think for ourselves, which means that he offended people on, this is the right, and he offended people on the left. He offended everybody in the center. But whether you agreed with him or not, it is hard to deny that Christopher Hitchens was one of the most eloquent and intelligent speakers of our time. Now, in June 2010, he found out that he had stage 4 cancer in his throat. And he promptly went to work just trying to get as much writing in as he could. And in those sort of sprinted efforts, Mortality came out of that work. This is a fascinating read because it is his sort of allowance. He allows us into his personal, most private moments as he is getting ready to die. And that sounds dark and gloomy, as the cover also feels. It's black with stark white lettering on it. And you know what? It is a little gloomy. But the thing that I love about Hitchens is he's also incredibly funny and is willing to take a jab at his cancer and his attempts to try and beat it. He's filled with hope. He's filled with curiosity. He wants to make the world a better place by donating his body in any way he can. But what I liked most about this is his experience facing death and losing his ability to be a writer, a thinker, and a speaker. And there's a section in this book where he really starts to mourn the fact that he will no longer be able to speak. He'll no longer be able to use his hands to type. And it made me think just how precious the gift is to me to communicate with other people like you, to share my thoughts, hopefully to have an adult conversation about things that matter, which I think is needed now more than ever, and to try and sort of challenge all of these emotionally destabilizing beliefs out there, and instead to just ask some smart questions and talk together. And I really hope that this podcast and this episode can be something or a place where we can do that, where we can bring in great books and talk about issues that matter. So that's my recommendation this week, Mortality by Christopher Hitchens. I think you're going to love it. Hey everyone, I have one last thing. Don't leave just yet. This is a big deal. I'm changing, not changing. I'm trying to refine the business model of the Read Well podcast. Now, that might shock you, but this is in fact a business, right? It does take a significant amount of my time each week to film these videos, to write the essays, to read the books, to make the recommendations. I have great guests that are getting ready to come on the show, including Marianne Wolf, who is the author of Reader Come Home. I also have Yasmin Mohammed coming on the show, the author of Unveiled. And there's just so many great plans coming up. Now, here's my hope. I want the Read Well podcast always and forever to be a place where we can do nothing but feel safe and talk about books and ideas that matter. I really don't want this to be a space where we have sponsorship and advertisements in here. In fact, that's why I created a private reading community away from Facebook and the other platforms, because I didn't want ads. I didn't want ads for the people in my community. I just wanted them to talk about books and ideas, right? I would like to keep that the same way. I'd like to keep ads out of the YouTube videos, off the podcast. I don't want ads in my newsletter. And there's a reason why. The moment that I let ads into the work that I do, it changes the work that I do. For example, if I have a corporation offer to sponsor a piece of content that I create, and they're willing to pay $1,000 or whatever it's going to be, well, now I have to somehow work into the content the use of their product, anything from a sports drink to hemorrhoidal cream. I don't know. But it drives me crazy when I'm really listening to a piece of content I care about, and there's hey, we'll be right back. We're going to talk about hemorrhoid cream now. It just really pulls me out of the thought process that I'm in. I want this place to be free of those distractions, where we can just talk to great guests, just talk about great books. I think you get the idea. So the business model that I'm working on here to keep this going, because it does take such a significant amount of my time, is I've set up a patron page, not Patreon though. I'm using a service called Buy Me a Coffee. I really like their platform. So I'll put the link in the show down below. Every podcast episode now has a link that says support the show. And I'll put this in all of the YouTube videos as well once I get time. But the goal is simple. If you click on that link and you are interested in supporting the work I do, if you think there's value here and you want to continue to see recommendations and expert interviews, then the way to do that is it's $1.25 a week. Essentially, it adds up to $5 a month. And that small sort of support really goes to helping pay for the costs and the time and the effort, and would mean a lot. So if you're somebody that wants to do that, please click the link in the notes down below that says support the show, and I'll send you a personal message as a thank you. Anyway, until next week, as always, remember to read slowly, take notes, and apply the ideas. I'll see you all next time.